France is currently facing an unprecedented crisis that has sent shockwaves, not just across its own borders, but rippling through the international community, especially in Africa. Imagine the deep-rooted connections forged over decades. Suddenly unraveling African nations that once stood closely tied to Paris are now boldly stepping away, cutting off military and economic ties in a wave of assertive independence that is shaking the very foundations of France's influence. For so long, France was seen almost as a guardian, a dominant force in Africa through its military presence, economic arrangements like the CFA currency zone, and a complex network of political ties collectively known as Franco-Afrique. But that dominance now appears fragile and is visibly slipping. Countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, the Central African Republic, and Chad are at different stages of disengaging, each with their unique stories yet part of a larger, shared movement. Take Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, for example. These countries have not only expelled French troops, but have redefined their alliances with new partners like Russia and the Wagner paramilitary group, signaling a dramatic geopolitical shift. The departures were not peaceful or gradual. There were tensions, accusations, and a raw desire for sovereignty that no longer seemed served by the old French ties. Similarly, the Central African Republic saw the complete exit of French forces in 2022, and Chad followed at the end of 2024 amid a fiery break in military agreements. Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire, traditionally among France's closest allies in Africa, have chosen a more nuanced path, but with the same underlying theme of transformation. Senegal's President Bassirou Diomaye spoke of a future built on open, diversified, and uninhibited cooperation, a phrase heavy with hope, but also a clear signal that the old, unquestioned dominance has faded. Côte d'Ivoire, balancing between domestic pressures and long-standing ties, announced the withdrawal of French troops starting January 2026, illustrating a delicate balancing act amid political currents and a rising call for independence from many citizens. What fuels this bold breakaway? The emotions here are complex, a cocktail of frustration, pride, and sometimes anger. Resentments born from a colonial past where indigenous systems and cultures were often dismissed and supplanted have reignited in recent years. Citizens from cities as varied as Abidjan and Niamey have taken to the streets, challenging their governments to sever the lingering neo-colonial threads that bind them to an old order perceived as unequal and outdated. This growing African assertion has also pushed France into a corner, economically and politically. The country is grappling with its own internal challenges: rising debt, slowing economic growth, and political uncertainty, just as the partners it has long relied on for economic and strategic alliances are walking away. The influence that once seemed unassailable now appears vulnerable. With Paris forced to reconsider its Africa strategy amid a sweeping loss of trust and influence. Yet, this crisis is not merely about loss. There's a sense of urgent reinvention in the air. France's government, led by President Emmanuel Macron, faces immense pressure, both from within and abroad, to hit a reset button, one that requires moving beyond rhetoric to concrete changes. The departure of French troops is symbolic but also practical. It marks an end to one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. But there's also a subtle reminder that while military presence is shrinking, the ties through culture, language, and commerce are more enduring and less visible. The French language continues to be a unifying thread for millions across Africa, and economic interdependence, despite the shifts, still binds the continents in complex ways. The future could hold a redefined relationship less about control, more about partnership. Amid these tumultuous changes, the human stories become even more profound. The leaders navigating this transition are under tremendous pressure from both domestic populations demanding change and international realities imposing constraints. Citizens caught in the middle may feel hope, but also uncertainty, as they watch long-standing ties dissolve and new untested alliances take form. The air is thick with a sense of history in the making, fragile yet forceful, filled with potential but shadowed by the risks of instability. France's crisis is more than a political or economic upheaval. It's a deeply emotional moment for many across both continents. It's a story of power lost, sovereignty reclaimed, and a shared journey toward a future that neither side fully understands yet, but both are compelled to face. The significance of this moment, its challenges, and its human dimension cannot be overstated, for it will shape not only France and Africa, but the broader international order for years to come. For many years, the relationship between France and certain African countries felt like a familiar story, long-standing and deeply intertwined. But today, this story is shifting dramatically, with countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and Chad stepping away from the ties that once felt unbreakable. It's like watching a close-knit family going through a painful but necessary separation, where history, pride, and new aspirations collide. Start with Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Three nations in the Sahel region where the presence of French troops has been a common reality for decades. French military forces were widely seen as a security guarantee, a reminder of France's commitment to helping combat violent extremism that has plagued the region for years. But that security promise slowly turned into a source of frustration. For many in these countries, French military interventions began to feel more like an occupation than an alliance. The departure of French forces was not just a political decision. It was a collective exhale for a people tired of decades-long conflicts, shadowed by the presence of a former colonial power. Mali's expulsion of French troops in 2022 marked a historic turning point. The air was thick with a desire to reclaim sovereignty and to chart a path that felt truly their own. Similar decisions in Burkina Faso and Niger were tinged with the same determination, highlighting how these countries were ready to rewrite their futures without the familiar silhouette of French soldiers in their capitals. It's a raw emotion, part pride, part frustration that is palpable in the streets and in the conversations between neighbors. Friends and politicians alike, Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire tell a slightly different, yet equally compelling story. Historically close allies of France, these countries have taken a more measured approach, signaling a desire to maintain productive relationships while also asserting new terms of engagement. Presidents and officials speak about open, diversified partnerships, signaling that while the past ties are acknowledged, the future must reflect mutual respect and equality. This shift is like a friendly but firm handshake, transforming into a partnership of equals rather than a one-sided bond. For Senegal, a nation known for its vibrant culture and political stability, this period is both hopeful and reflective. The people appreciate the history shared with France but seek relations that empower rather than overshadow. It's a graceful dance of balancing respect for tradition with the hunger for independence. Côte d'Ivoire's decision to begin withdrawing French troops by early 2026 is a testament to this careful balancing act. It carries the weight of political calculation, reflecting public sentiment and a desire to move beyond a colonial shadow while carefully managing economic and security interests that remain linked to France. Chad adds another emotional layer to this picture. A nation which, like many others, once felt the steady grip of France in its military and political affairs, has emerged from years of political turmoil marked by a recent transition of power. The French military withdrawal at the end of 2024 echoed the broader African call for self-determination and was met with a mix of hope and uncertainty. The streets, the markets, the small villages all bear witness to a country trying to find balance between a legacy of foreign involvement and the urgent need to forge its own path forward. This collective African withdrawal from French military presence paints a picture of change that is heartfelt and complex. It's not about rejection for the sake of rebellion, but a pushback against a system that felt unequal and sometimes suffocating. There is a deep yearning for sovereignty, the right for these countries to decide their own destiny without external pressure or influence. Of course, this transition isn't without challenges. As French troops leave, questions swirl about who will fill the vacuum. Some countries have opened dialogues with other global players, signaling a realignment of alliances that extends beyond France. This shift brings uncertainty, new partnerships could bring different kinds of influence and interests, stirring up debates about true independence and the risks that come with geopolitical maneuvering. But amid the uncertainty, there is a palpable sense of hope. People are dreaming of a future where their countries are not just seen as territories on a map, but as vibrant, autonomous nations capable of managing their own security, economy, and identities. Young generations, especially, are vocal about their right to decide their future, unhindered by the ghosts of colonialism. This moment also calls for empathy and understanding from observers around the world. The process of disentanglement from historical ties is always messy and emotional, filled with disappointments, resentments, but also moments of unity and vision. The human stories behind these diplomatic headlines reveal cities alive with debate, families weighing prospects, and communities cautiously optimistic about what lies ahead. From the bustling markets of Bamako to the calming shores of Dakar, from the busy streets of Ouagadougou to the colorful avenues of Abidjan, the echoes of this shift resonate deeply. These African nations, intimately linked to France by history, but distinct in their dreams, are choosing to redefine what friendship and cooperation mean in the 21st century. The story of France's military withdrawal from these nations is more than a geopolitical event. It's a profound human journey, marked by striving for dignity, respect, and partnership that honors the past while embracing change. It's a story of transformation, brimming with emotion and hope, played out on a stage where history, culture, and identity all intertwine, inviting everyone to witness a new chapter unfolding. When looking at the string of French military interventions in Africa, especially in the last decade in the Sahel region, many would describe them as a heartbreaking saga filled with unintended consequences, missed opportunities, and frustrations on all sides. It is a story that begins with hope and determination but ends in disillusionment and withdrawal, leaving a trail of questions and emotions that still echo across the continents. France launched Operation Servile in 2013 with a clear objective, or at least so it seemed at first, to stop jihadist militants who had seized vast territories in northern Mali. It seemed like a critical mission to rescue a country on the verge of collapse and restore order. The French troops moved quickly, dismantling jihadist strongholds and helping push militants back. For many, it was seen as a military success, a shining moment where France stepped up as a protector of a vulnerable nation. But as the dust settled, deeper challenges arose, challenges that military force alone could never solve. The transition from Operation Servile to the broader and more ambitious Operation Barkhane in 2014 marked a shift that would later reveal fundamental flaws in the strategy. Barkhane was meant to extend across the Sahel, covering several countries facing insecurity and terrorism: Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. Yet, despite a formidable presence of thousands of French soldiers, the region remained unstable. One of the hardest realities was that the military efforts lacked a coherent political strategy or long-term vision. The security focus overshadowed other crucial elements like development, governance, and social inclusion. There was a failure to nurture strong political institutions and address the grievances that fueled conflict in the first place. The emphasis on combating terrorism created an ongoing conflict environment that bred resentment instead of reconciliation. Imagine the daily lives of the people living in these regions caught between armed violence and foreign military operations. For many locals, French troops came to symbolize a kind of occupation, not liberation. Reports of extrajudicial killings and abuses by forces allied with the French only deepened mistrust. Instead of feeling protected, communities felt alienated. Anti-French sentiment grew. The leadership that France chose to back often contributed to instability. These governments were sometimes seen as predatory or corrupt, clinging to power without democratic legitimacy. This created a paradox. France was fighting to stabilize regions under regimes that alienated much of their own people. This disconnect undercut the credibility and effectiveness of the French mission. The consequences were profound. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger experienced repeated coups, political upheaval, and worsening insecurity. Frustration mounted, both at home and abroad, resulting in suspicions about France's true intentions. Did France want a stable and independent Africa, or was it trying to protect its interests in a manner reminiscent of colonial times? The withdrawal of French troops was not a voluntary retreat. It was a forced acknowledgement of failure. The stark reality hit: military might alone could not defeat insurgencies or create stable societies. The French presence, once regarded as a pillar of security, became increasingly untenable amid rising anti-French rhetoric, protests, and diplomatic tensions. At the heart of this failure was an underestimation of the complexity of the Sahel's challenges. Military operations focused on tactics and short-term victories, overlooking the broader social and political fabric. A hearts and minds campaign was missing, one that could win genuine local support and provide alternatives to violence. Soldiers fought battles, but the deeper war for legitimacy and trust was lost. Picture the lonely nights for soldiers deployed far from home, aware that their mission was mired in ambiguity and skepticism. Feel the disappointment of diplomats in Paris who hoped for a model intervention, but faced a fragmented region unraveling politically. Hear the voices of Africans caught in this turmoil, wishing for peace and self-determination, but finding themselves pawns in a larger game. Another disheartening aspect was the failure of communication and cultural understanding. France struggled to bridge the divide between military objectives and the aspirations of local populations. Narratives of neocolonialism were powerful, fueled by history and amplified by contemporary missteps. Russia and other international players seized on this discontent, spreading propaganda that further eroded France's standing. Looking back, it's clear that the mission was never just about counterterrorism. It was tangled up in a web of geopolitics, economics, and historic relationships that made simple military solutions impossible. The French government knew this, but struggled to adapt policies accordingly. Development aid was minimal and often seen as a tool to justify the military presence rather than a genuine investment in the future of these countries. The military exit throws a glaring spotlight on the need for new approaches. The lesson is stark. No amount of force can substitute for political stability, social justice, and economic opportunity. The time for superficial or short-lived fixes has passed. African countries are demanding partnerships based on respect, mutual benefit, and above all, sovereignty. For France, this reckoning brings pain and reflection. It's also an opportunity, though difficult, to rethink its role and relationship with Africa. The hope is for a future where cooperation is not about dominance, but equality. Where military support is balanced with diplomacy, development, and cultural respect. In this story of failure, there is also a fragile thread of hope. The resilience of African nations shines through as they reclaim agency over their futures. And as France acknowledges the limits of its past strategies, it is a moment charged with emotion, disappointment, resolve, guilt, and ultimately a cautious optimism for renewed bonds based on new principles. This chapter reminds us all that history, politics, and human lives are deeply intertwined. Military power cannot impose peace or progress without understanding and addressing the root causes of conflict. The withdrawal of French forces from the Sahel is a sobering event, but also a call to action for honest, sustained efforts to build a more stable and just Africa, one where partnerships are grounded in trust, dignity, and shared goals. France's long-standing influence in Africa has experienced a significant transformation, one marked by the waning of its traditional power and the simultaneous rise of African nations asserting themselves on the global stage. This shift is neither simple nor one-dimensional. It's a story woven with threads of economic ambitions, diplomatic recalibrations, and a growing insistence on equality and respect from African countries towards their former colonial ruler. The tangled past and hopeful future of France-Africa relations come alive when we dive into this complex dynamic. A journey charged with emotion, pride, and cautious optimism. For decades, France viewed many African countries as part of its extended sphere of influence, a special relationship often described by the term Franc-Afrique. This relationship was characterized by military bases, economic dependencies, cultural ties, and political maneuverings, sometimes behind closed doors, that painted a picture of France as a dominant presence on the continent. But times have changed. African countries are no longer content to be seen as mere satellites or economic footholds. Instead, they are emerging as players demanding to be treated as equals, partners shaping their own destinies. The reality today is palpable. In regional summits, diplomatic meetings, and streets bustling with young voices, there is a powerful sense of African pride and a growing resolve to break free from the shadows of colonial legacies. Countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and Chad have taken bold steps by cutting military ties and re-examining economic agreements with France. The French military bases in many of these nations are closing or significantly downsizing, while trade relationships are being renegotiated with a focus on fairness and mutual benefit. This shift cannot be understood without feeling the undercurrents of history and emotion. Many Africans recall painful colonial memories, exploitation, cultural erasure, political repression that linger as a backdrop to today's reality. The push to sever military ties is not just about politics or strategy. It is about dignity and self-respect. There is a collective desire to reclaim sovereignty over issues of security, economy, and governance that had long been influenced by external powers. It's a moment of national awakening, where decisions are driven not just by pragmatism, but by the heartbeat of a continent eager to define its own narrative for France. This change presents both a challenge and an opportunity. The decline of its military presence signals a loss of traditional influence and raises questions about its place in global geopolitics. Economically, France is facing competition from an increasingly multipolar world where China, Russia, Turkey, and even smaller powers engage with Africa on different terms. French businesses, once seen as favored partners, are now navigating a more competitive landscape where local partnerships and African interests take center stage. Yet, despite the apparent setbacks, there is a shared recognition that the France-Africa relationship is far from over, it is merely evolving. Contemporary diplomatic discourse increasingly focuses on redefining the partnership based on equality, transparency, and shared prosperity. Leaders on both sides express hopes for collaboration that respects African autonomy while acknowledging deep cultural and historical ties. Take Senegal's approach, for example, where the government has articulated a clear policy of reducing dependency while maintaining constructive engagement with France. Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye's speeches, filled with pride and national sovereignty, exemplify this balanced stance. Troops are withdrawing not as a rejection of friendship, but as a reaffirmation of Senegal's sovereignty. The emphasis is on open, diverse partnerships, where deals are not preordained, but chosen based on mutual benefits. It's a message that resonates widely as African countries weigh alliances with not only France, but also China, the United States, and others, emphasizing pragmatism over sentiment. Contrast this with Rwanda, where relations with France have seen remarkable thawing after decades of strain related to historical grievances. Here, diplomacy and reconciliation have paved the way for renewed cooperation and investment, highlighting how nuanced and varied the France-Africa relationship can be. It shows that while the overarching trend is toward Africa's empowerment, individual ties adapt uniquely depending on history, leadership, and shared goals. What lies beneath these shifts is a rising sense of African agency that transcends politics, economic independence, cultural revival, and technological advancement all contribute to a richer, more self-sustaining Africa. The continent's population is young and dynamic, hungry for innovation and leadership on its own terms. This energy influences how African governments engage with external partners, demanding respect and fair play rather than unilateral advantage. France's challenge now is how to respond authentically and effectively to this new reality. The old model of dominance no longer works, nor is it welcomed. What might a future France-Africa relationship look like? It's tempting to imagine renewed partnerships grounded in genuine cooperation investments that uplift local economies. Joint efforts to tackle health and climate challenges, cultural exchanges